Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back with another episode in our ECI Impact 2023 speaker series. Today, I'm thrilled to have with me Nick Gallo. First of all, Nick, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So you killed it this morning on a keynote, and what really struck me was several different things. One was you put together the convergence of several events. Obviously, the pandemic was a fulcrum, but other things were percolating along, like the business roundtable statement on the purpose of a corporation, where they articulated 5 stakeholders, a new generation or two coming into the workplace who has different values than older generations, the new geopolitical reality coupled with a pandemic reality that we do have to look at supply chains in a different way, and customers demanding that companies do business ethically with sustainability. And that it really struck me that this has been a key theme of this conference is we are at a fulcrum point, and the future really is now, and that we need to look and do things differently. And did I get what you were saying?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It just feels like this really stark dividing line between this sort of old era and this new era. And I remember in my first year in undergrad business school, they were talking about knowledge work, and they're talking about we're knowledge workers, and that was like in the early 2000s. And it's 20 years later, and it's like our workplaces still haven't progressed to what this new normal is. All these structures have been broken. We used to have these really hierarchical structures. Now everybody's remote, and they're just naturally flat. They're naturally a lot more flat. And so it really is a huge opportunity for our industry, and that's why I get so excited about it, because every industry is not changing like this. Like, this one is changing big time, and a lot of the groundwork that we've been laying for the last 20, 30 years, we now can start building from. I mean, if you've ever watched a skyscraper build or get built, it seems like forever before it starts going, because they're laying the foundation and they're doing all that stuff, and then once that foundation's laid, it really can be built very quickly. And I think that same thing is going to happen here with us.
So you and your brother bought what used to be called a hotline company.
Yep.
And then you evolved to talking about Speak Up. Then you evolved to talking about culture. And then you've evolved to a variety of other ways to look at doing things. So I really see the evolution of your company, now Ethico, as part of this larger picture. Would that be fair as well?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think we've followed a natural progression that I think everybody follows. You start doing one thing, and then you start to see my sort of purview is a lot bigger, the area of my potential impact is a lot bigger, and then you just begin to fractal out into those different areas. And I think it's followed a similar kind of trend with our industry, where you typically, when it first started, it was a smart person on the legal team having their boss say, go figure this thing out. And now it's a whole industry with conferences and podcast networks, and it's this whole sort of living, breathing thing. And I don't know, it's just like a super exciting time. Just for all these ingredients to be laid out on the countertop, the dish we can make is going to be very tasty.
You gave the example of back when you were in private equity and doing a roll-up was really the first time you saw the true importance of culture.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could tell that story again.
Yeah, so that's like a typical kind of private equity play where you buy a bunch of sort of complementary companies and put them together. And I've always just had an eye for culture. I've just seen that on teams I've been on and whatever, sports teams, whatever, that it's really this sort of non-material, powerful force. And so we had just put 3 companies together of equal size, and they were all extremely different, played in different sides of the market. You could feel the vibe in those companies were different. And I was at my first board meeting, and we were talking about this acquisition target, buying yet another one. Putting now 4 companies together over 12 months is just wildly fast. And so it was my first board meeting, and I was excited to be there for sure, but I also was a wallflower. Like, I was just taking it all in, but there were just these alarm bells going off that nobody seemed to think that it was a problem of putting all these different companies together. On to the acquisition target. It was an ESOP, an employee stock option plan owned company, meaning all the employees were owners. And so we were really attracted to the company because they had really phenomenal performance, great margins, like higher than normal margins. And so my job during diligence was to figure out why those margins were so high. And I was able to quantify it. Like, I was able to cut the numbers up and put them into the appropriate cells on the spreadsheet. But the real answer was the culture of that company was just better. The people worked harder. They smiled more. They just put more of themselves into their work. They signed their work, as my mom would say. And it was crazy, so crazy, because I was in my first, so now I'm in the modeling meeting, the financial modeling meeting, where we're looking at the projections and saying, okay, we're done with diligence, what is this thing going to look like? And I was working with this boss of mine this guy was he was such a jerk. It was people would meet not knowing each other and then become best friends because they both had an equal disdain of this guy, okay? I was talking about this culture thing and how I thought the company was special, and I just thought, what are we going to do if the margins drop, if these people aren't owners anymore, if the culture changes? And he just talked to me like I was such an idiot. He was like, where do you want to put that? How do you want to model that? Acting as if just because you couldn't quantify it and touch it and feel it, if it wasn't a material thing, it didn't exist. That was the mentality I was met with. And I remember telling him, I don't know how to quantify this. I'm just telling you, this is going to be a factor, I think. And it was like a switch was flipped, or it's like the bonfire got extinguished. Immediately, almost immediately, within a quarter, all the margins dropped down to the normalized levels that we saw everywhere else. And that was such an eye-opener for me, because the rest of that investment was like a disaster. It's like we put these 4 companies together, and it took 5 to 7 years to just sort through the mess of it, because they never congealed or something. They never just came together as a new thing, a new entity. And that was just such an eye-opener for me and for my brother. Gio saw the same kinds of things in his portfolios, and we've just seen it time and time again that if you have a culture that's authentic, that people have a lot of forgiveness for it, by the way, because everybody knows that nothing is perfect, but they'll engage in it and they'll allow themselves to care. And I think that is what is lacking across our kind of faceless transactional economy right now. That care that the cobbler would put into the shoes he made, or the baker would put into the bread that they're making for their village, that's been dissipated away with our sort of transactional workplaces that are really, at least for the last 50 plus years, have been just all about the dollar.
You said something else that really struck me, Nick, which was around the Great Resignation. And I think many people thought that the Great Resignation was about, I'm not happy with my work. But you really had a different spin on it. It was not all internal, I'm not happy. It was, I'm not happy with my company.
Yeah.
I'm looking for my company to do something different. Could you maybe expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, in the talk, I talked a little bit about how we all have this hierarchy of values, and that if you were to list out those values or those goals by generation, you'll see that this generation's hierarchy of goals are just materially different. And I think a lot of that is due to how our economy has changed, how our world has changed, what the life experience for these generations, Gen Z, millennials, have been. There's just been a reshuffling of those things. And if the top slot isn't being a millionaire or owning a home or any of those other kinds of things, then it gets filled with something else. And I think if this generation's American dream is living life on their terms, then that means that they're going to prioritize working for companies that make them feel good, that maximize sort of personal satisfaction, that maximize happiness. And I think that happiness is often rooted in aligning with a cause or aligning with an organization that has similar priorities to you or similar goals to you. And I think people can find meaningful work because people can, let me back up. We understand that we're parts of a whole in most cases, right? We work on teams, we're part of larger organizations. And I think people can understand that if they're playing that role in this broader organization and that organization's broad purpose resonates with theirs, then it's not about the work itself, to your point. It's about the work that you're doing, or the work, or who you're doing the work for. It plays a much bigger role than it has, at least for my grandfather's generation, for sure.
Even my generation.
Even your generation, yeah.
I wondered if I could maybe end by asking you any observations you've had about the conference so far.
The conference, I like it. It's a little bit smaller than some of these larger conferences where it just seems like it's something for everybody. Sometimes when it's something for everybody, it's like everything for no one. So this conference seems like we're talking about a little bit higher level, a little bit more dialed in. I think the quality of the attendees are a lot higher. The conversations that I've had have just been a lot more kind of impactful, or a lot more, robust. And I think it's been great. There's some really cool sessions coming up. I'm looking forward to your one about with that futurist. That's going to be pretty cool. But yeah, I like some of these smaller conferences because I just feel like you can end up connecting a little bit more. It's not the boondoggle that some of these bigger ones are. And the content, I think, speaks for itself.
Nick, I wanted to thank you again for taking the time to visit with me.
Glad to be here, man. Thanks so much for having me.